What if I told you that on April 26, 1890, two cowboys near Tombstone, Arizona, shot and killed a creature so monstrous it defied all known biology? According to the Tombstone Epitaph, a newspaper of record, the beast was a winged reptile, a featherless bird, with smooth skin and gigantic wings spanning an estimated 160 feet. Its body was over 90 feet long, with a head the size of a horse. The cowboys, after a long pursuit on horseback, finally brought it down with their Winchester rifles. They dragged the colossal carcass back to town, where the newspaper claimed a photograph was taken, a photograph that showed the creature nailed to a barn, its immense wingspan stretching the entire width of the building. That photograph has never been found. For over a century, researchers, historians, and cryptozoologists have scoured archives, desperate to find this single definitive piece of evidence. They call it the lost Thunderbird photograph. Some believe it's the ultimate proof of a surviving prehistoric pterosaur. Others claim it's a hoax, a tall tale spun in the Wild West. But the story refuses to die. It persists, whispered in forums and debated in documentaries, because the description given by those cowboys wasn't new. They weren't the first to see a flying monster in the American sky. They had unknowingly stumbled upon a legend thousands of years older than their town, older than their country, a story woven into the very fabric of the continent itself. To understand what they might have seen, we have to look beyond the dusty pages of an old newspaper and into the heart of a power so immense, it was said to command the heavens. We have to understand the legend of the Thunderbird. This is not a story about a big bird. To reduce the Thunderbird to a mere cryptid, a simple undiscovered animal, is to fundamentally misunderstand its power and its place in the cosmos. Across countless Native American cultures, from the Pacific coast of the Kwakwaka'wakw to the Great Lakes of the Anishinaabe and the vast plains of the Lakota, the Thunderbird is a being of supreme supernatural force. It is not an animal that lives in the sky. It is the sky. It is the storm itself, given form and will. Imagine a creature so vast its shadow can swallow a mountain range. Its feathers are the color of bruised clouds and shimmering obsidian. The beat of its wings is not a sound you hear with your ears, but a pressure you feel in your bones. A deep, resonating boom that is the very origin of thunder. And its eyes, when the Thunderbird blinks, a flash of pure, blinding energy rips across the sky. That is lightning. It is the physical manifestation of weather, a living, breathing storm front that brings with it the life-giving rain and the devastating tempest. In many traditions, the Thunderbird is a servant of the Great Spirit, a divine enforcer tasked with protecting the human world from the dark and chaotic forces that dwell beneath the earth and in the deepest waters. It is a guardian, a gatekeeper between the upper world of the sky and the lower world of mortals. When it soars, it is a symbol of power, of strength, and of righteous vengeance. It represents the awesome, untamable power of nature, a power that can nurture and a power that can destroy, often in the same breath. The stories vary from nation to nation, each culture adding its own unique brushstrokes to the portrait of this magnificent being. For the Siouan peoples of the Great Plains, the Thunderbird, or Wakianjiang, is a complex and sacred entity. The Wakianjiang are not just one being, but a family of storm spirits. They are often depicted as being at war with their eternal enemies, the horned water serpents known as the Unk Secula. This is a battle of cosmic proportions, the sky against the water, the air against the deep. The thunder is their war cry, the lightning their weapon, as they strike down into the lakes and rivers to keep the malevolent serpents from flooding the world and devouring humanity. These battles were not just myths. They were explanations for the violent thunderstorms that would suddenly erupt over the plains, a reminder that powerful forces were constantly at play just beyond the veil of human perception. In the Pacific Northwest, the Thunderbird is a central figure in the art, mythology, and social structure of many tribes. Here it is often depicted on magnificent totem poles, a crest of high-ranking chiefs and families, symbolizing their power and lineage. The Nuu-chah-nulth people tell stories of the Thunderbird as a benevolent giant who could lift an entire killer whale from the sea with its talons, carrying it back to its mountain nest to feed its young. In these traditions, the Thunderbird could be an ancestor, a founder of a clan who, in a time of great need, bestowed his power upon his people. He was a provider, a protector, whose presence ensured the prosperity and survival of the tribe. But the Thunderbird is not always a benevolent guardian. It is a primal force, and like any force of nature, it is terrifyingly impartial. It embodies the concept of divine judgment. In some legends, the Thunderbird would unleash its fury not just on monsters, but on humans who had violated sacred laws or disrespected nature. It would call down floods to wash away corrupt villages or strike down arrogant individuals with bolts of lightning. It was a constant, looming reminder that humanity is not the master of the natural world, but a small part of it, subject to its laws and its power. To see a Thunderbird was an omen of immense significance. It could mean a great victory was coming, or it could signal a time of terrible trial. Its appearance demanded respect, reverence, and fear. This duality is key to understanding the creature's enduring power. It's not a simple hero or a mindless monster. It is a complex, awe-inspiring entity that embodies both creation and destruction. The same storm that brings the rain needed to grow crops can also produce the flash flood that washes them away. The Thunderbird represents this essential, and often terrifying, truth of the natural world. It is a protector that demands appeasement, a savior with the capacity for incredible violence. And it was almost always locked in a state of eternal conflict. Its primary role as a celestial warrior meant it had a primordial enemy, an adversary that represented the opposite of everything the Thunderbird stood for. While the Thunderbird ruled the sky, the sun, and the day, its nemesis commanded the depths, the darkness, and the underworld. This creature went by many names: the horned serpent, the water panther, Mishepeshu, but its nature was always the same. A scaly reptilian monster that lurked in the deep, a being of chaos and corruption. The battles between them were the stuff of legend. They were said to have shaped the very geography of North America. Mountains were raised by the force of their blows, and valleys were carved by their struggles. Every clap of thunder, every bolt of lightning striking the water, was another blow in a war that began at the dawn of time and continues to this day. A war for the fate of the world. This ancient struggle between the sky and the abyss is the engine that drives so much of the Thunderbird's mythology, defining its purpose and its very existence. It is a battle that explains why the world is the way it is. A delicate balance between order and chaos, light and dark, life and death. To understand this cosmic war, you must first understand the Thunderbird's ancient enemy. It lurks in the places where the sky cannot reach. The crushing, silent blackness of the deepest lakes, the churning mud of the riverbeds, and the hidden caverns of the underworld. It is a creature of immense power, known by many names, but its essence is always the same. A being of the deep water, a primordial force of chaos. Among the Ojibwe of the Great Lakes, it is Mishepeshu, the great lynx, a fearsome beast with the head of a cat, a body covered in scales, and a serpent's tail tipped with deadly horns. To the Lakota, it is Unveiling, a colossal horned serpent, so vast it could encircle a mountain. These creatures, and others like them across the continent, are the lords of the underworlds. They are jealous, possessive, and hungry. They guard the copper and precious metals in the earth, and they can drag a canoe to the bottom of a lake in the blink of an eye. Their very presence poisons the water, bringing sickness and misfortune. They are the masters of the flood, the sudden world-ending deluge that scours life from the land. They represent everything the Thunderbird is not: chaos to its order, the depths to its heights, the suffocating power of water to the life-giving power of rain. The conflict between them is not born of simple hatred. It is a fundamental opposition of existence. The Thunderbird, from its home in the highest reaches of the sky, looks down and sees the balance of the world. It ensures the seasons turn, the plants grow, and that humanity can live. The horned serpent, from its watery abyss, seeks to pull everything down into its chaotic, murky domain. It resents the sun, the air, and the order of the world above. And so they fight. One of the most powerful stories of this eternal struggle comes from the Lakota Sioux, a story that explains the very creation of a dramatic and haunting landscape in South Dakota. Long ago, the tale goes, the world was threatened by the great water spirits, the Unveiling. They were monstrous and powerful, and they grew angry with the two-legged people and the other animals living on the surface of Unsaimaka, Grandmother Earth. In their rage, they decided to destroy everything. They summoned a great flood, causing the waters of the world to rise, swamping the plains, drowning the forests, and chasing the fleeing people and animals to the highest ground. The world was being washed away. It seemed that all life was doomed, destined to be consumed by the dark, churning waters of Unveiling. But as the people prayed for deliverance, a shadow fell over the world. The sky turned a dark, bruised purple. A wind began to howl, not the wind of a simple storm, but a wind with a voice, a purpose. And then came this sound, a deep, resonant boom that was not just heard but felt in the bones, the very marrow of creation. It was the sound of a billion drums beating at once. It was the sound of the Wakinyan, the thunder beings, the Thunderbirds, arriving for war. They came from the west, a great flock of them, their forms so immense they blotted out the last of the light. Their wings, stretching for miles, churned the clouds into a furious boiling sea of gray and black. Each beat of those wings was a clap of thunder that shook the foundations of the earth. Their eyes, glowing with the fury of the storm, flashed and blinked, and with every blink, a bolt of jagged white-hot lightning seared the sky and struck the waters below. The Unkthi rose from the flood to meet them. Horned heads larger than mountains broke the surface, their roars mixing with the thunder. The battle that followed was an apocalypse. The Thunderbirds dove from the sky, their talons crackling with electrical fire. They ripped at the scaly hides of the water serpents, and the lightning from their eyes pierced the waves, boiling the very water where the Unkthi swam. The great serpents fought back, lashing their tails to create tidal waves that crashed against the remaining peaks of land, trying to dislodge the last survivors. They spat venomous floods of water into the air, trying to drag the Thunderbirds from the sky. For days and nights, the world was nothing but the chaos of their battle. The sky was a constant flash of light, the air a constant roar of thunder and shrieks. The waters of the flood were stained with the blood of both sky beings and water spirits. The Thunderbirds fought with a singular purpose: to protect the world, to preserve the balance. They drove the Unkthi back, striking them again and again with bolts of lightning, their sacred fire. Finally, the great battle was won. The Thunderbirds were victorious. The bodies of the slain Unkthi were left to dry as the floodwaters receded. The sun broke through the clouds and the land began to heal. But the evidence of this cataclysmic war was left scarred onto the face of the earth. The Lakota say that the sun baked the bones of the defeated Unkthi, bleaching them white and turning them to stone. And that is how the Mako-Sika, the Badlands of South Dakota, were formed. Those strange barren hills, those fossil-filled canyons, are the remains of the great water serpents, a permanent, physical reminder of the Thunderbird's victory and its role as humanity's greatest protector. This is why, for so many, a thunderstorm is never just a weather event. It is a living, breathing myth unfolding in real time. When the sky darkens and the clouds gather, it is the Thunderbird spreading its wings. When you hear that low, distant rumble, it is the sound of its approach. And when the lightning cracks across the sky, it is the Thunderbird striking its ancient underwater foe. People caught on the ground during such a storm are witnessing a skirmish in a war as old as time itself. They are caught between two unimaginable powers, and their survival depends on the Thunderbird's triumph. This core belief, this epic of the sky god versus the water demon, is not isolated to one people. From the Pacific Northwest, where the Thunderbird battles the great whale, to the Great Lakes, where it hunts Mississippi, this theme of a celestial guardian protecting the world from a chaotic, subterranean or submarine threat is remarkably consistent. The details change, the names of the creatures are different, but the fundamental relationship remains. The Thunderbird is the agent of cosmic order, the enforcer of balance. Its very existence is a shield, protecting the fragile world of the living from the monstrous forces that seek to drag it into darkness. It is a being of terrifying power, a creature whose voice can shatter stone and whose gaze is lightning. But all of its power, all of its fury, is directed toward a single noble purpose: protection. It is a guardian deity, but not a gentle one. Its protection comes in the form of a raging, violent storm. Its love for the world is expressed through a cataclysmic war fought just above our heads. This duality is central to understanding the Thunderbird. It is a source of both fear and reverence, a being you pray to for safety while simultaneously praying you are not in its path when it answers that call. We have seen its role as a cosmic warrior, the guardian of the entire world. But what about its relationship with individual people? Was the Thunderbird a distant, abstract force, or did it intervene directly in the lives of human beings, choosing champions, offering gifts, and demanding respect? Its role as a protector wasn't just on a global scale, but a deeply personal one as well. This personal connection is where the legend truly takes flight, moving from the realm of cosmic battles to the hearts and homes of the people who revered it. The Thunderbird was not some distant, uncaring god in the sky. It was a watchful guardian, an ancestor, and sometimes a kingmaker. In many traditions, particularly those of the Pacific Northwest, certain lineages and chiefs claimed direct descent from the Thunderbird, or from a human who had been blessed, transformed, or chosen by the great bird. This wasn't just a claim of power, it was a declaration of immense responsibility. To be of the Thunderbird's line meant you were expected to embody its virtues: strength, leadership, and above all, a duty to protect your people. This relationship wasn't one-sided. The Thunderbird chose its champions carefully. It didn't look for the strongest or the wealthiest, but for those with a pure heart and a spirit that resonated with its own righteous fury. These chosen individuals were often granted supernatural gifts: the ability to call storms, unparalleled strength in battle, or a profound wisdom that could guide their tribe through hardship. They became living conduits for the Thunderbird's power, earthly agents of the sky deity. In return, they were expected to honor the Thunderbird through ceremony, through art, and through their actions. The magnificent totem poles of the Kwakwaka'wakw and other coastal peoples, so often topped with the formidable figure of the Thunderbird, are not just decorations. They are story poles, genealogical charts, and sacred contracts carved in cedar, proclaiming the ancient pact between a family and their celestial protector. But how was such a pact forged? It often began in a time of great crisis, when a community was pushed to the very brink of existence, facing a threat that mortal hands could not defeat. And there is no story that captures this dynamic more powerfully than the epic tales of the Thunderbird's war against the monsters of the deep. Imagine a village nestled in a cove along the rugged, misty coast of what is now Washington or British Columbia. The people here are masters of the sea. Their entire existence, their food, their culture, their spirituality, is woven from the tides and the bounty of the ocean. The cedar canoe is their lifeblood, and the whale is both a revered spirit and a source of immense prosperity. But one day, a shadow falls upon their way of life. A monstrous creature emerges from the depths. Some legends call it a killer whale of unnatural size and malevolence, a sea wolf named Wasco. Others describe it as a colossal horned serpent, a true leviathan of the abyss. Whatever its form, its purpose is singular: destruction. It hunts not for hunger but for sport. It smashes canoes, dragging fishermen to a watery grave. It preys upon the whales the people depend on, leaving a trail of devastation that starves the village. The people are terrified. Their bravest warriors are helpless against such a primordial foe. The sea, once their generous mother, has become their tomb. Prayers are offered, shamans perform their most powerful rites, but the monster's reign of terror continues. Hope begins to dwindle like the fading light of a winter afternoon. It is in this moment of ultimate despair that a young chief, or perhaps a humble orphan ignored by all, decides to seek the help of the only power great enough to challenge the beast of the sea. He leaves the relative safety of the village and embarks on a perilous journey, climbing high into the forbidden peaks of the coastal mountains, the sacred realm where the Thunderbird makes its nest. The journey is an ordeal in itself. He endures freezing winds, treacherous cliffs, and the gnawing pangs of hunger. This is a vision quest, a desperate pilgrimage to the throne of the storm god. Finally, exhausted and near death, he reaches a desolate, windswept peak above the clouds. And there he sees it, a nest of woven cedar branches, each one the size of a great tree trunk. And in the nest, a being of unimaginable scale and power, the Thunderbird. Its feathers are the color of a thunderhead, its eyes crackle with raw lightning, and its beak and talons are carved from living stone. The air hums with immense energy, and the young man feels a terror so profound it is almost holy. He does not flee. Instead, he speaks from his heart, telling the great spirit bird of his people's suffering, of the sea monster that has stolen their hope. He offers his own life in exchange for the safety of his village. He asks for nothing for himself, only for the salvation of his tribe. The Thunderbird listens, its gaze piercing the young man's very soul. It sees no greed, no ambition, only courage and self-sacrifice. It sees a spirit worthy of its aid. What happens next is the stuff of pure, undiluted legend. The Thunderbird lets out a cry that is not a sound, but a physical force, a peal of thunder that shakes the very foundations of the mountains. It unfurls its colossal wings, each one vast enough to block out the sun, and with a single cataclysmic beat, it launches itself into the sky. The world is plunged into an unnatural darkness as it soars out over the ocean, the wind from its wings whipping the sea into a furious storm. Down below, the sea monster, arrogant in its power, senses the change in the sky. It rises to the surface, ready to challenge this new threat. And then it sees it, a being of the sky as powerful as it is of the sea. The battle that follows is an elemental clash of titans. The Thunderbird dives, lightning bolts erupting from its eyes to sear the monster's hide. The sea monster thrashes, creating whirlpools and tsunamis that batter the coastline. The ocean boils where they fight. The sky rips apart with thunder. The people of the village, huddled in their longhouses, can only listen to the cosmic war being waged for their very existence. Finally, with a scream of divine fury, the Thunderbird plunges its massive talons deep into the sea monster's back. The beast roars in agony, its struggles churning the water into a blood-stained foam. But the Thunderbird's grip is absolute. With a heave of its powerful wings, it begins to lift the colossal creature from the water. The strain is immense. The Thunderbird is pulling a god from its own domain. It carries the writhing, dying monster high into the air, over the coastline, and far into the mountains. There, on the very peak where the young man made his plea, the Thunderbird drops its vanquished foe. The impact shatters the mountaintop, and the monster's lifeblood flows down the slopes, staining the rocks a deep red that, in some places, is said to be visible to this day. The Thunderbird had won. The sea was once again safe. The great bird returns to the young man, who has watched the entire spectacle in stunned awe. The Thunderbird does not speak in human words, but communicates directly to his spirit. It bestows upon him its blessing, marking him as its chosen one. He is given a new name, a new purpose. He is to lead his people, to teach them the lessons of courage and sacrifice, and to ensure they always live in balance with the natural and spiritual worlds. He descends the mountain, no longer a desperate youth, but a leader transformed, imbued with the power and authority of the storm itself. He returns to his village not just as a hero, but as a living bridge between the world of man and the realm of the Thunderbird, his family line forevermore bound to the great protector of the skies. This sacred bond, however, was not forged for glory. It was a pact born of necessity, a heavy mantle of responsibility passed down through generations. For the family of the hero, and for all the peoples who looked to the skies for protection, they now understood the Thunderbird's true purpose. It was not merely a spirit of the storm, it was a guardian, a warrior, a sentinel in an ancient, unending war against the forces that dwell in the dark, watery depths of the world. To understand the Thunderbird, you must understand its eternal enemy. In the world below, coiled in the abyss of the deepest lakes and lightless rivers, lurked a creature of immense power and malevolence, a being known by many names across the continent, Uktina to the Cherokee, Missipeshu to the Ojibwe, but most commonly known as the Great Horned Serpent. Where the Thunderbird was a creature of the sky, of order, and of life-giving rain, the Horned Serpent was its antithesis. It was a being of the underworld, of chaos, and of devastating floods. Its scales shone with an unnatural hypnotic light. Its horns were said to be made of pure copper, and its very presence could poison the water and cause sickness to spread across the land. This was not a simple rivalry between predator and prey. This was a cosmic struggle between the upper world and the lower world, with the world of humanity precariously balanced in between. The Horned Serpent sought to drag the land back into the primordial waters from which it came, to drown the world in a cold, dark silence. The Thunderbird, in its mountain nest at the edge of the sky, was the only force capable of stopping it. Their battles were the stuff of legend, cataclysmic events that shaped the very landscape. The fiercest thunderstorms were not random acts of nature. They were the clash of these two titans. Imagine a time when the rains would not stop. For weeks, the sky was a sheet of gray, and the rivers began to swell, their banks disappearing under a greedy rising tide. The people watched in fear as their homes were threatened, as the fields that gave them life turned into a vast, murky lake. This was not the Thunderbird's reign, the clean, life-giving storm. This was the work of the Horned Serpent, its immense body stirring in the depths, calling the waters upward, seeking to reclaim the land. The elders knew the signs. The water had a strange, oily sheen, and the fish had all vanished. A profound sickness, a spiritual coldness, was seeping into the world. The people gathered to offer prayers, to burn sacred tobacco, and to send their pleas to the heavens. They looked to the western mountains, where the Thunderbird made its home, hoping for a sign, for a savior. And as the serpent's floodwaters lapped at the doors of the highest lodges, their prayers were answered. A shadow fell over the land, so vast it blotted out what little light remained. It was followed not by a sound but by a feeling, a pressure in the air, a deep resonant hum that vibrated in the chest. Then came the thunder, not the distant rumble of a summer storm, but a series of concussive explosions that felt like the sky itself was cracking open. The Thunderbird had arrived. It was larger than any story had ever described. Its wingspan stretched from one horizon to the other, each beat of its impossibly huge wings generating a gale-force wind that pushed back against the rising flood. The rain, which had been the serpent's weapon, now became the Thunderbird's cloak, shrouding it in a swirling vortex of mist and fury. From its eyes, which burned like twin suns, flashed streaks of pure, jagged light. This was not lightning as we know it, it was a weapon. Each bolt struck the water with the force of a falling mountain, boiling the surface and sending up plumes of steam that hissed into the tormented air. The horned serpent, enraged by this challenge, rose from the depths. Its colossal head broke the surface, its copper horns glowing with a malevolent inner fire. It was a creature of mesmerizing, terrifying beauty, its iridescent scales shifting in color, its eyes ancient and full of a cold reptilian intelligence. It opened its jaws and unleashed a torrent of black, venomous water, a flood within the flood, meant to poison the last remaining patches of dry land. But the Thunderbird was a master of its domain. It dove, a streak of black against the gray, its powerful talons extended. The wind from its descent alone was enough to part the waters. It did not fear the serpent's venomous breath, for it was a creature of pure energy, of clean air and righteous power. The two beings collided in a cataclysm of elemental fury. The serpent coiled its massive body around the Thunderbird, trying to drag it down into the watery abyss, to crush it, to extinguish its celestial fire. The Thunderbird, in turn, sank its talons deep into the serpent's hide, unleashing point-blank blasts of lightning that made the creature's own luminous scales seem dim. The battle raged for a day and a night. The world trembled with every blow. The people, huddled on the highest ground, could only watch in awe and terror as the sky and the water became one violent, churning chaos. The thunder was the Thunderbird's war cry. The roar of the flood was the serpent's answer. Mountainsides were sheared off by stray lightning bolts. Valleys were scoured clean by the force of the winds. The very geography of the world was being rewritten by their struggle. Finally, with a thunderclap that was said to have been heard at the edge of the world, the Thunderbird gathered all its strength. It beat its wings with such force that it created a vacuum, lifting the horned serpent partially out of the water, exposing its vulnerable underbelly. In that single critical moment, the Thunderbird struck. A bolt of lightning, thicker and brighter than any that had come before, shot from its eyes and pierced the serpent's heart. A tremor ran through the entire world. The horned serpent convulsed, its death throes causing a tidal wave that would have wiped out the last of the people, had the Thunderbird not shielded them with its own body, taking the brunt of the impact. The unnatural light in the serpent's horns faded, and its immense form sank slowly back into the depths, its blood turning the water a dark, murky red. As the great enemy vanished, the storm began to subside. The Thunderbird, exhausted but victorious, circled the sky once, its shadow passing over the grateful survivors. The wind softened, the thunder faded to a distant rumble, and the oppressive gray clouds began to part. For the first time in weeks, a ray of sunlight broke through, illuminating a world that was battered and scarred but saved. The floodwaters, no longer powered by the serpent's dark magic, began to recede. The evidence of these great battles is said to be etched into the land itself. The peculiar, deep lakes in the northern woods are the craters left by the Thunderbird's lightning. The massive, isolated boulders that dot the prairies are the stones it dropped on its enemies. The petroglyphs carved into cliffsides depicting a great bird fighting a serpent are not just myths. They are historical records, eyewitness accounts of a war that has raged since the dawn of time. The people learned to read the signs, to understand that the Thunderbird was their protector, but that its protection came at a cost. They learned to respect the water, to know that even in its calmest moments, the serpent's kin might lie waiting. And they learned to honor the storm, to see the lightning not as a threat, but as the flashing eyes of their guardian, forever watching, forever vigilant from its throne in the sky. This celestial guardian did not fight with tooth and claw alone. Its very being was a weapon, its essence intertwined with the raw, untamable power of the sky. To the people below, the storm was not a random meteorological event. It was the Thunderbird's sacred act of war. The gathering clouds were the mustering of its feathers, a blanket of shadow thrown across the sun to signal its descent. The wind was its breath, a cleansing gale that scoured the land and whipped the surface of the waters into a fury, churning the depths to expose the enemy hiding below. And the thunder was the beat of its colossal wings, a sound that resonated not in the ears, but in the chest, a percussive announcement of its arrival that could shake the mountains and send tremors through the very bones of the earth. It was a sound meant to terrify, to drive the creatures of the dark water back into their sunless abysses. But its primary weapon, the symbol of its power and judgment, was the lightning. It was not merely a flash of light. It was a spear, a celestial arrow plucked from the heart of the storm cloud. In some traditions, it was said the Thunderbird carried a living snake, a serpent of light, which it would hurl down at its foes. In others, the lightning bolts were generated by the flashing of its eyes, each blink a blinding discharge of pure energy. These were strikes of impossible precision, capable of splitting a centuries-old tree down to its roots or turning sand into glass. This was the power that kept the balance. This was the fire from the heavens that held the primordial chaos at bay. And the chaos had a name. While the specific legends vary from the Algonquian to the Sioux to the peoples of the Pacific Northwest, the adversary was almost always the same in its nature, a creature of the deep, a being of immense power that represented the opposite of the Thunderbird's skybound order. Most often, it was the horned serpent, known as Uktena to the Cherokee, or Mishipeshu to the Anishinaabe. This was no common snake. It was a creature of immense size, with a body as thick as a tree trunk and covered in scales as hard as flint, shimmering with an unnatural oily iridescence. From its head grew antlers like a deer or horns like a bull, and set in its forehead was a blazing crystal or a luminous jewel, the source of its hypnotic power. Its domain was the inverse of the Thunderbird's, the cold, dark, silent world of the underwater, the deep lakes, the murky rivers, the hidden underground springs, places the sun could not reach. It was a creature of immense strength, capable of causing floods and whirlpools with a flick of its tail. But its true danger lay in its subtlety. Its gaze could mesmerize any creature, luring them into the water to be drowned and consumed. Its breath was a poisonous fog that could sicken a village, and its very presence could corrupt the water, making it undrinkable and killing the fish. The horned serpent was the embodiment of all that was hidden, treacherous, and unclean. It was the sickness in the water, the shadow beneath the surface, the ancient hunger that lurked just beyond the safety of the shore. The conflict between these two beings was not a simple rivalry. It was a cosmic war for the fate of the world, and the stories of their battles are etched into the oral traditions of countless tribes. One such tale, echoed in many forms, speaks of a village on the shores of a great lake. For generations, the people had lived in peace, fishing the clear waters and honoring the spirits of the land. But then a change began. A strange, foul-smelling fog started to roll off the water in the mornings, a mist that did not burn away in the midday sun. The fish vanished, their bodies washing ashore bloated and pale. Children who played too close to the water's edge disappeared, leaving behind only a single moccasin on the muddy bank. The elders knew the signs. The horned serpent had awakened from its slumber in the depths. Fear gripped the village. Warriors armed with their strongest bows and sharpest spears patrolled the shoreline, but they were helpless. How could you fight a shadow that lived beneath the water? They watched as the great serpent finally revealed itself, its massive head breaking the surface in the center of the lake, its horns dripping with dark water, its crystalline eye glowing with a malevolent light. It was claiming the lake, poisoning the lifeblood of the people. In desperation, the shaman of the village climbed to the highest cliff, making offerings of sacred tobacco and praying to the sky. He called out to the great Thunderbird, the protector, the guardian against the horrors of the deep. For days the sky remained clear, and hope began to dwindle. The serpent grew bolder, its coils now visible just beneath the surface, circling the village's shore. But then on the fourth day, a single dark cloud appeared on the horizon. It grew with unnatural speed, swallowing the blue sky. The air became heavy and electric. A low rumble began, a vibration that grew into a deafening roar. The serpent in the lake sensed the coming challenge and hissed, a sound like 1,000 snakes, as it raised its horned head to the sky. The storm broke with a fury that seemed to tear the world apart. Wind flattened the trees along the shore. Rain fell in blinding sheets. And then, through a rift in the churning black clouds, the Thunderbird descended. It was larger than any story had ever told, a living mountain of feathers and muscle. Its eyes flashed, and the first bolt of lightning lanced down, striking the water and turning it to steam. The battle had begun. The horned serpent was a formidable foe. It dove deep, using the murky water as its shield. The Thunderbird's lightning strikes exploded on the surface, unable to penetrate the depths. The serpent then surged upwards, attempting to drag the great bird down into its domain, its jaws snapping just inches from the Thunderbird's talons. For hours the two titans fought. The sky was a canvas of terrifying light, the lake a cauldron of boiling water. The people of the village, huddled in their lodges, could only listen to the cataclysm unfolding outside. Finally, the Thunderbird, with its superior vision, saw its chance. It unleashed a mighty gust of wind with a single beat of its wings, a gale so powerful it parted the waters of the lake for a single breathtaking moment. The serpent's glistening body was exposed on the lakebed, writhing in the mud. In that instant, the Thunderbird's eyes blazed with the intensity of a dying star. A final cataclysmic bolt of lightning, thicker and brighter than all the rest, shot down from the heavens. It struck the horned serpent directly on the glowing jewel in its forehead. There was a sound that was not a sound, a blast of energy that shattered the crystal and sent a shockwave across the water. The great serpent convulsed, its massive body thrashing in its death throes, churning the lake into a muddy fury. Then, with one last shudder, it grew still and began to sink, vanishing back into the depths from which it came, its light extinguished forever. As quickly as it had arrived, the storm subsided, the clouds parted, and the sun shone down on the ravaged shoreline. The Thunderbird circled the lake once, its victory cry echoing across the valley, a sound not of rage but of grim satisfaction. Then it ascended, disappearing back into the sky. The people emerged to find the water slowly clearing. The foul mist was gone. The air was clean. Their home was safe. They had witnessed firsthand the power of their protector, a raw, terrifying force of nature that fought on their behalf. They now understood that the balance of their world was fragile, maintained by a constant, violent struggle between the powers of the sky and the water. But this understanding raised a new, more unsettling question. They had seen the Thunderbird's protective fury, but what would happen if that fury, that awesome and destructive power, was ever turned against them? This question hung in the air of the longhouses and whispered on the winds that swept across the plains. It was a fear born of profound respect, for the Thunderbird was not a tame spirit, not a pet or a servant to be called upon at will. It was a primordial force, an embodiment of the sky's raw power, and like any great power, it had a dual nature. It was the warm, life-giving rain, but it was also the devastating flood. It was the gentle breeze, and it was the tornado that could tear a village from the earth. The people understood that the Thunderbird's protection was not an unconditional guarantee. It was a covenant, an agreement built on a foundation of respect, balance, and right action. And when that covenant was broken, the Thunderbird's role shifted from guardian to judge, jury, and executioner. Its wrath was not random or malicious. It was a direct consequence of human transgression, a cosmic rebalancing. When a community fell into greed, when they forgot their sacred duties to the earth and to each other, the sky itself would take notice. Stories are told of villages that grew arrogant. Perhaps their hunters began to kill for sport, leaving carcasses to rot in the sun, a grave insult to the animal spirits who had given their lives so the people could eat. Or perhaps the people began to feud amongst themselves, allowing jealousy and hatred to poison the heart of the community, disrupting the harmony that was essential for survival. In these tales, the warnings always came first. The elders would have dark dreams. The shamans would see ill omens in the flight of lesser birds or the patterns of the clouds. The rivers might run murky, the fish disappearing from their usual spawning grounds. These were signs, the world gently trying to nudge the people back onto the right path. But when pride and corruption take root, they make a person deaf to warnings. And so, the people would continue their destructive ways, blind to the storm that was gathering, not just on the horizon, but in the heart of the sky spirit itself. Then one day the sky would change. A darkness would fall at midday, a heavy, oppressive gloom that swallowed the light. The air would grow still and thick, charged with an energy that made the hair on your arms stand up. There would be no wind, no birdsong, only a terrifying, expectant silence. And then from the heart of the black clouds would come the sound. Not the distant rumble of a summer storm, but a deep, resonant beat, like 1,000 war drums pounding in unison. It was the sound of the Thunderbird's wings, each beat a clap of thunder that shook the very bones of the earth. When the Thunderbird came in judgment, its lightning was not the wild, forked energy of a normal storm. It struck with terrifying precision. It was an instrument of justice. A bolt might obliterate the food cache of a hoarder who let others starve while he feasted. Another might shatter the largest canoe of a man who refused to share his catch with the widows and orphans. The lightning would strike the weapons of the warmongers, melting them into slag, and the torrential rains that followed wouldn't just be water. They would be a cleansing, washing away the filth and the arrogance, flooding the places where sacred laws had been broken. It was a terrifying, devastating spectacle, but it was never a complete annihilation. The Thunderbird's goal was not to destroy the people, but to destroy the corruption within the people. It was a form of radical spiritual surgery, cutting out the disease so the community could heal and begin again, humbled and with a renewed understanding of their place in the world. This power wasn't just reserved for entire communities. It could be focused on a single individual who showed the ultimate disrespect. One particularly widespread story, told with variations among many tribes, speaks of two young men. One was humble and respected the old ways. The other was arrogant, a great hunter who believed his own skill made him superior to the spirits. He would boast that he could outsmart any animal and that he feared nothing, not even the beings of the sky world. The humble friend would warn him, telling him that such pride was a dangerous path, but the arrogant hunter would only laugh. One day, they were hunting far from their village when a storm began to gather. The humble friend recognized the signs immediately: the unnatural silence, the color of the clouds. He urged his friend to take shelter in a nearby cave. "This is no ordinary storm," he pleaded. "The Thunderbird is flying today." The arrogant hunter scoffed. "The Thunderbird is just a big bird," he sneered. "Its thunder is just noise. I am not afraid." In an act of supreme defiance, he drew his bow, nocked an arrow, and shouted at the sky, "If you are so powerful, show yourself. I challenge you." He fired his arrow straight up into the churning black clouds. For a moment, nothing happened. The arrogant hunter let out a triumphant laugh. But his laugh was cut short. The clouds parted directly above him, as if a curtain had been torn open. And there, framed in the sky, was the Thunderbird. It was larger than he could have ever imagined, its feathers the color of a storm-bruised sky, its eyes glowing with a cold white light. It didn't screech or cry out. It simply looked down at the foolish human who had dared to challenge it. From the cave, the humble friend watched in frozen terror as a single, blindingly bright bolt of lightning, no thicker than a spear shaft, shot down from the Thunderbird's eye and struck the arrogant hunter. There was no sound, only an instantaneous flash of white light that bleached all the color from the world. When the light faded, the hunter was gone. The storm vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The sky cleared. The humble friend crept out of the cave, his heart hammering in his chest. Where his friend had stood, there was only a circle of blackened, smoking earth. And in the very center of that circle, untouched by the blast, lay a single, enormous, iridescent feather. It was a message and a warning. The Thunderbird had not only answered the challenge, but it had also left proof of its power, a reminder to all who would hear the story. Humility is survival, and arrogance is an invitation to destruction. These stories cemented the Thunderbird's role as a moral enforcer. It was the ultimate authority, a power that held humanity accountable. You couldn't lie to the Thunderbird. You couldn't bribe it or trick it. It saw the truth in people's hearts and in their actions. This belief system created a powerful incentive for social cohesion and ethical behavior. To live in balance with your community and with nature wasn't just a good idea. It was a matter of life and death, because the sky itself was always watching. The fear of the Thunderbird's judgment was a constant, invisible presence, a force that shaped laws, guided decisions, and reminded everyone, from the most powerful chief to the humblest child, that they were part of a much larger sacred order. Breaking that order came with a terrible price. But the Thunderbird didn't just police the boundary between right and wrong human behavior. Its role as a guardian extended far beyond that, into conflicts that were far older than humanity itself. It was a warrior in a cosmic battle against forces that sought to undo creation. Its fury was not only for arrogant humans, but for ancient, malevolent beings that crawled from the dark places of the world. These were not creatures you could reason with or appease. They were beings of pure chaos and destruction. And in those titanic struggles, the Thunderbird was not a punisher of humanity, but its ultimate champion, standing between the people and the abyss. Its greatest adversary was not a man with a bow, but a monstrous serpent that rose from the depths, a creature of horn and scale that was the Thunderbird's eternal mortal enemy. This was no ordinary snake. This was the horned serpent, a being as ancient as the bedrock and as cold as the deepest lake. In the traditions of the Great Lakes people like the Ojibwe, it was known as Misipeshu, the Great Lynx, a creature with the head of a cat, the horns of a deer or bison, and the scaled serpentine body of a dragon. To the Cherokee, it was the dreaded Uktena, a colossal serpent with a blazing crystal set in its forehead. Across the continent, from the woodlands to the plains, the form changed, but the essence remained the same. A primordial power of the underworld, the antithesis of the sky. Where the Thunderbird was a creature of the upper world, of air and fire and righteous fury, the horned serpent was a master of the world below. It lurked in the sunless depths of great lakes, in the hidden currents of mighty rivers, and in the dark, wet caves that burrowed into the earth. It was a being of water, but not the life-giving rain the Thunderbird brought. This was the water of the abyss, the suffocating, crushing pressure of the deep, the unpredictable fury of the flood. Its scales were said to be made of pure copper, and its horns held potent, dangerous medicine. It was a creature of immense power, but also of immense greed, jealously guarding its underwater treasures and dragging the unwary down to a watery grave. The conflict between these two beings was not a simple rivalry. It was a fundamental war for the balance of the world. It was the clash of sky and underworld, of light and darkness, of creation and destruction. The Thunderbird fought to protect the surface world, the realm of 2 legs and 4 legs, from being consumed by the chaos that churned below. The horned serpent sought to pull everything down into its murky domain, to flood the land, to corrupt the world with its cold, ancient power. One of the most powerful tellings of this eternal battle comes from the Menominee people. The story goes that a great horned serpent had made its lair beneath the waters of a lake, and its presence was a blight upon the land. It devoured fishermen whole, its immense size displacing so much water that it caused catastrophic floods, and its venomous breath poisoned the streams, making the people sick. The village elders prayed, they made offerings, but the serpent's power only grew. Despair began to settle over the people like a cold fog. Then one day the sky turned a dark bruised purple. The air grew heavy and still. Not a leaf stirred. The people looked to the sky, not with fear of a normal storm, but with a kind of desperate hope. And then they saw it. A speck in the distance, growing larger and larger, resolving itself into the unmistakable shape of a colossal bird. The Thunderbird had heard their prayers. It circled once above the afflicted lake, its shadow so vast it plunged the entire village into twilight. The silence was shattered by a crack of thunder so profound it shook the very bones of the earth. It was not just a sound, it was a declaration of war. The Thunderbird folded its wings and dove, a living bolt of lightning aimed at the heart of the dark water. The moment its talons hit the surface, the lake exploded. A geyser of black water and steam erupted hundreds of feet into the air. The horned serpent, enraged at this intrusion into its domain, rose from the depths. It was a sight of pure terror. Its body was thicker than the oldest trees, its copper scales shimmering with a malevolent light. Water cascaded from its horned head, and its eyes glowed like embers in the dark. It hissed, a sound like 1,000 waterfalls, and a wave of foul, poisonous air washed over the shore. The battle that followed was the stuff of legend, a storm made manifest. The Thunderbird ascended, lightning arcing from its eyes and beak, striking the serpent's impervious scales. The serpent retaliated, coiling and striking, trying to drag the great bird from the sky and down into the depths where its own power was absolute. It spat venomous water that sizzled in the air, and it thrashed its tail, creating whirlpools that threatened to swallow the shoreline. For hours the battle raged. The sky was a canvas of terrifying light and shadow. The sound was a symphony of destruction, the roar of thunder, the hiss of the serpent, the crash of water, and the splintering of rock as the combatants slammed against the nearby cliffs. The people watched in awe and terror, huddled in their lodges, praying for their champion. They could feel the ground tremble with every blow. Finally, the Thunderbird saw an opening. As the serpent lunged, exposing the vulnerable flesh beneath its jaw, the great bird dove one last time. It was faster than thought, a streak of incandescent fury. It struck with the force of a falling mountain. Its talons, harder than flint, sank deep into the serpent's throat. At the same moment, a bolt of pure, concentrated lightning shot from its beak, striking the serpent directly in its horned head. There was a final, deafening explosion of thunder and light that bleached the world white for a moment. Then an unearthly scream from the serpent, a sound of agony and rage that echoed across the valleys. The colossal body went limp, thrashing in its death throes, churning the lake into a blood-red froth. The great beast sank beneath the waves for the last time, its dark power extinguished. Slowly, the storm subsided. The black clouds parted and sunlight streamed down, illuminating a world transformed. The Thunderbird, wounded but victorious, circled the lake one more time before ascending back into the heavens, disappearing into the clouds it commanded. In the aftermath, the people emerged from their homes. The air was clean again. The water of the lake, though stained, was no longer poisonous. The threat was gone, but the evidence of the battle remained forever etched into the landscape. The cliffs by the lake were shattered and scarred, as if struck by giant hammers. Strange, deep gouges were carved into the bedrock at the water's edge, marks left by the serpent's death throes. These places became sacred, powerful sites, physical proof of the story, a permanent reminder that they were watched over by a protector in the sky. This story and others like it served a crucial purpose. It wasn't just entertainment, it was an explanation. It explained the violent, unpredictable nature of storms. It explained the existence of strange geological formations. It explained why some bodies of water were considered dangerous or sacred. But more than that, it provided a framework for understanding the world as a place of constant struggle, a delicate balance between powerful, opposing forces. The Thunderbird doesn't always win so decisively. In many traditions, the battle is eternal. The Thunderbird may drive the horned serpent back into the depths, but it can never truly destroy it. The serpent will always be there, lurking, waiting for a moment of weakness. This reflects a profound philosophical understanding. The forces of chaos and destruction can be managed, they can be fought back, but they are a permanent part of the cosmos. Complete victory is impossible. The goal is to maintain balance. This eternal conflict also reinforced the people's role in the world. Their ceremonies, their prayers, their respect for nature. These were not passive acts. They were believed to strengthen the Thunderbird, to lend power to the forces of order and good. By living in a proper, balanced way, they were active participants in this cosmic war, helping to keep the world safe from the chaos that slithered in the darkness below. The Thunderbird was their champion, but they were its soldiers, fighting alongside it with every ritual and every prayer. The storm was no longer just a weather event. It was the sound of their protector fighting on their behalf. And nowhere was that battle more vivid, more etched into the very soul of the land, than in the Pacific Northwest. In that world of mist-shrouded islands, ancient cedar forests, and a relentless churning sea, the Thunderbird wasn't just a spirit. It was an ancestor, a founder, a king. For the peoples of this coast, the Kwakwaka'wakw, the Nuu-chah-nulth, the Tlingit, the Thunderbird was family. Their stories tell of a time long ago, when the world was new and the lines between human, animal, and spirit were as fluid as the coastal fog. In one of these origin stories, a great Thunderbird soared down from his home on a high, inaccessible mountain peak. He was a creature of immense power, his feathers the color of storm clouds, his eyes holding the fury of lightning. He flew over the ocean, his shadow passing over the great whales that swam below. He was the master of the upper world, a being of pure, untamed power. But he was lonely. He landed atop a mountain, and in a moment of profound magic, he pushed back his beak as if it were a mask, lifted his feathered cloak from his shoulders, and stepped forth as a man. He shed his divine form, trading the sky for the earth, and built a great house of cedar wood. He took a human wife, and from their union, the first people of that tribe were born. This story is crucial. It's not about a god helping humans from afar. It's about a god becoming human. It established a direct bloodline from the most powerful force of nature to the chief of the village. The Thunderbird wasn't just their protector, he was their great-grandfather. This lineage was everything. It was a claim to the land, a right to fish in certain rivers, a title to the songs and dances that told his story. and this claim had to be publicly proven. This wasn't just a story told around a fire for entertainment. It was a legal document, a spiritual charter, a declaration of power, all validated in the great potlatch ceremonies. During a potlatch, a chief would invite neighboring tribes to a massive feast, where he would give away vast amounts of wealth, canoes, blankets, carvings, food. But the most important thing he distributed was his story. Dancers wearing magnificent, articulated Thunderbird masks would emerge into the firelight. These masks were masterpieces of engineering and artistry. With the pull of a hidden string, the outer bird-like beak would split open, revealing a human face carved inside, reenacting the moment of transformation from God to man for all to witness. The dancer would spread his arms, mimicking the immense wingspan, and the story of the tribe's divine origin would be sung and danced, stamped into the memory of everyone present. By accepting the chief's gifts, the guests were formally acknowledging the truth of his claim. They were validating his lineage, straight from the Thunderbird himself. The physical embodiment of this claim stood for all to see year-round, in the form of totem poles, carved from a single colossal cedar tree. These monumental sculptures were the story of a family rendered in wood, and so often, perched at the very top, with wings outstretched as if to shelter the entire village, was the Thunderbird. His depiction was specific: a massive, powerful body, often with a prominent crest of feathers or horns on his head, symbolizing his supernatural power. But his most defining feature was his beak, not the straight, pointed beak of an eagle, but a deeply curved, almost hooked beak, like that of a bird of prey, but exaggerated, more powerful, designed for seizing and lifting prey as massive as a killer whale. He was the guardian at the top of the pole, the beginning of the story. Below him might be the other crests of the family: the bear, the wolf, the raven who helped his ancestor, or the whale he famously hunted. The pole was a family tree, and the Thunderbird was its divine root, planted in the sky. But the sky has its master, and the sea has its own. The Thunderbird's power was defined not just by his protection of humanity, but by his eternal war with the monsters of the deep. His great adversary in the Pacific Northwest was the Sizeatl, a terrifying creature of the underworld. The Sizeatl was a horned, two-headed sea serpent, with a central human face. To even look upon it was to risk death. Your joints would lock, your body would turn to stone. The Sizeatl was the embodiment of chaos, a creature of the dark, cold depths, a being that could capsize canoes and command the sea's destructive power. It was the perfect rival for the Thunderbird. Sky against sea, order against chaos, light against darkness. The battles between them were the stuff of epic legend, the explanation for the region's notoriously violent storms. When a sudden furious squall would descend upon the coast, the people knew it wasn't just weather. It was the Thunderbird descending from his mountain perch to fight the Sizeatl. The deafening crack of thunder was the sound of the Thunderbird's beak striking the serpent's impenetrable hide. The flash of lightning was the glint from its supernatural eyes, the only light powerful enough to reveal the Sizeatl without turning the Thunderbird to stone. The torrential rain and crashing waves were the thrashing of the two colossal beings, as they grappled in the churning waters. The Thunderbird would dive, talons extended, aiming to lift the Sizeatl from its source of power, the water. The Sizeatl, in turn, would try to drag the great bird down into the depths, to a realm where its wings were useless. These were not simple fights. They were cosmic struggles that played out in the skies and on the seas right before the people's eyes. A successful whale hunt was seen as a gift from the Thunderbird, a sign that he had won a battle and dropped his prey for his human children. A canoe lost at sea was a tragic sign that the Sizeatl had gained the upper hand. This constant conflict reinforced the Thunderbird's role. He wasn't a passive guardian. He was an active warrior, constantly defending the world of light and air from the encroaching chaos of the deep. His presence gave the people courage. They lived in a dangerous world, where a sudden storm could wipe out a fishing party in an instant. But they knew that above the storm clouds, their ancestor was fighting for them. The thunder that rattled their longhouses wasn't a threat. It was a reassurance. It was the sound of their king defending his kingdom, and by extension, his family. Owning the Thunderbird story, the masks, the songs, was the ultimate symbol of nobility. It meant you were descended from the strongest, most powerful being imaginable, a being who chose to walk among humans and create a nation. It was a legacy written not in ink, but in cedar song and the very storms that shaped their world. But what happens when the world that created these stories begins to vanish? When the great cedar forests are felled and the potlatch is outlawed by foreign governments who see it as a threat, the Thunderbird's greatest battle wouldn't be against a serpent of the sea, but against the relentless tide of history itself. This new force didn't arrive with the roar of thunder or the flash of lightning. It came with the creak of wooden ships, the sharp scent of gunpowder, and the rustle of paper treaties that were written in a language the land didn't understand. It was a power that didn't fear the storm because it sought to tame the world itself, to grid it with fences, to chart it on maps, and to silence the old songs that gave it meaning. For the Thunderbird, a being whose very existence was woven into the spiritual fabric of the people, this was a threat unlike any other. How do you fight an enemy who doesn't see you? Who hears your thunder and calls it meteorology? Who sees your sacred mountains and calls them resources? The assault wasn't just on the people, it was on their reality. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the United States and Canadian governments enacted policies of aggressive assimilation. Their goal was not merely to conquer but to erase. The potlatch, that great ceremony of connection, law, and redistribution where Thunderbird stories were told and dances were performed, was outlawed in 1885 in Canada. It was deemed wasteful and anti-Christian by a government that could not comprehend a society built on giving rather than taking. To dance the Thunderbird dance, to raise a totem pole in its honor, was now a criminal act. The great cedar houses fell silent. The masks were hidden away. The Thunderbird was driven from the sky and into the shadows. Simultaneously, a generation of children was stolen. The residential school system was a weapon designed to sever the chain of knowledge. Children were taken from their families, their hair was cut, their language was forbidden. They were taught that their beliefs were savage, their stories were lies, and their gods were demons. They were told the world was made of atoms and equations, not of sky people and underwater serpents. The storytellers were growing old, and the ears that were meant to listen were being taught to forget. The thunder was fading to a whisper. It seemed for a time that the tide of history had won. The Thunderbird, a creature of immense world-shaping power, was being unwritten. It was being systematically dismantled, not by a great monster, but by bureaucracy, by legislation, by a schoolhouse bell. But you cannot kill a story that is true. Not really. You can drive it underground, but there in the dark its roots only grow deeper. The stories of the Thunderbird didn't vanish. They were told in hushed tones, around fires late at night when no one was listening. They were coded into the patterns of a basket, carved onto the back of a spoon, whispered in a language the authorities had tried to stamp out. The Thunderbird became a symbol of something new: survival. It was the enduring power of a culture that refused to die. It was the thunder in the heart that could not be silenced. It was the promise of a storm that would one day return to wash the world clean. As the old world was being suppressed, the new world began to notice the Thunderbird in its own way. Anthropologists and ethnographers arrived, armed with notebooks and wax cylinder recorders. They saw themselves as scientists, preserving the last echoes of a dying culture. They collected the stories, meticulously writing down the details of the great bird, its battles with the horned serpent, its role in creation. But in this act of preservation, something was lost. The Thunderbird was stripped of its sacredness. It was no longer a living, breathing force of nature and spirit. It was an artifact, a specimen. It was filed away in academic journals under labels like myth, folklore, and superstition. The living god was placed in a museum case, its thunderous voice reduced to silent printed words. And then something strange happened. The story escaped the museum. It broke free from the anthropological archives and flew out into the landscape of American popular culture, transforming once again. This time it wasn't a god or a spirit. It was a monster, a cryptid. The legend begins in the heart of the Wild West, a place already steeped in its own mythology of cowboys, outlaws, and untamed frontiers. The year is 1890, the place the Arizona desert. The story goes that two cowboys were riding through the desert when they were startled by a massive, winged creature circling overhead. It was no eagle, no condor. It had smooth skin, a massive wingspan like a barn door, and a head like an alligator. In a panic, they grabbed their rifles and fired. The creature crashed to the earth, dead. Stunned by what they had done, they dragged the colossal carcass into the nearby town of Tombstone. They nailed it to the side of a barn, stretching its wings out to their full, terrifying breadth. The entire town came out to see the impossible creature. A photograph was taken, capturing the image of 6 men standing in front of the monstrous bird, proof of its existence. This photograph was said to have been published in the local newspaper, the Tombstone Epitaph. And from there the story spread, becoming a fixture of American Fortean lore. The Thunderbird photograph became a holy grail for cryptozoologists, a piece of lost evidence that could prove that a creature of myth once soared through American skies. For decades, researchers and enthusiasts have scoured archives, searching for this lost picture, this definitive proof. They call it a Thunderbird, linking the cowboys monster to the ancient Native American legends. But in this linkage, a profound misunderstanding occurs. The Thunderbird of the Tombstone legend is not the Thunderbird of the Kwakwaka'wakw or the Ojibwe. The cowboy's Thunderbird is a biological anomaly, a surviving pterosaur, a mystery to be solved by science. It's a thing to be shot, to be proven, to be possessed. It's a monster. The spiritual dimension is gone. The role as a creator, a judge, a protector of the people is erased. The complex relationship of respect and fear is replaced by a simple hunt for a specimen. The story becomes an episode of unsolved mysteries, not a sacred narrative that explains the very structure of the cosmos. This transformation reveals more about the new culture than the old one. It shows a deep-seated need to validate the world through physical evidence, to capture and categorize even the most sacred of mysteries. It's the ultimate expression of the very worldview that tried to erase the Thunderbird in the first place. If it's real, we must be able to prove it, to own it. The irony is staggering. A being that represents the untamable power of nature is reduced to a grainy, lost photograph, a symbol of a culture's inability to believe in anything it cannot pin to a wall. Yet, even as this new, distorted legend grew, the real Thunderbird story was biding its time. It endured the silence of the residential schools. It endured the indignity of being labeled a mere myth. It endured being twisted into a monster for a new audience. It waited. It waited for its children to come home. It waited for the laws to change. It waited for the drums to sound again. Because the Thunderbird is not an animal to be shot down, nor a photograph to be found. It is a power, a presence, a story that lives in the people themselves. Its survival was never dependent on a dusty newspaper clipping. Its survival was guaranteed by the resilience of the human spirit, by the elders who refused to forget, and the young who were beginning to ask questions, to seek out the old ways, to listen once again for the sound of a distant, approaching storm. The greatest battle was over, and against all odds, the Thunderbird was still here. Now the only question was, how would it re-emerge into the modern world? The world it was returning to was not the one it had left. The great forests were now grids of concrete and light. The sacred mountains were dwarfed by towers of steel and glass, their peaks scraping a sky hazy with the breath of a billion machines. The silence of the plains had been shattered by the roar of engines, and the stars, once the storybook of the gods, were now washed out by the perpetual twilight of human ambition. In such a world of logic, of science, of relentless quantifiable fact, where was the place for a creature of pure spirit and mythic power? Where could a Thunderbird even land? The answer, it seemed, was in the periphery, in the blurry photographs and the shaky handheld videos posted to the dark corners of the internet. The whispers began again, not around tribal campfires, but on cryptozoology forums and late-night radio shows. The legend took on a new name, a cryptid. Sightings, often dismissed but stubbornly persistent, trickled in from across the continent. In the 1940s, a newspaper in Illinois reported multiple, credible witnesses seeing a bird of monstrous size. In 1977, the small town of Lawndale, Illinois, was gripped by terror when a 10-year-old boy was allegedly snatched and carried a short distance by a massive, winged creature before being dropped. Witnesses described 2 enormous birds, unlike anything they had ever seen. Decades later, in Pennsylvania and Alaska, pilots and locals would report encounters with birds possessing wingspans that defied all known biology, 15, 20, even 30 feet across. And of course, there was the ghost in the machine of history, the most famous and elusive piece of evidence, the Tombstone Thunderbird photograph. The story is an American classic. Sometime in the 1880s or 90s, cowboys near Tombstone, Arizona, supposedly shot and killed a colossal pterodactyl-like bird. They dragged its carcass into town and, in an act of frontier bravado, posed for a photograph, standing with their rifles, the creature's immense wingspan nailed to the side of a barn, stretching far beyond the building's doors. For over a century, people have sworn they saw this photograph. They remember it vividly, printed in magazines like Fate or in books on the unexplained. Yet, no one has ever been able to produce it. It has become a phantom artifact, a shared memory of something that may have never existed, a testament to the sheer power of the story. These modern sightings are tantalizing. They scratch an ancient itch in the human psyche, the desire for the world to be wilder, more mysterious and grander than it appears. But to focus only on the search for a physical creature, for a biological specimen to be captured and categorized, is to miss the true and far more profound re-emergence of the Thunderbird. Perhaps we have been looking in the wrong sky all along. The legend's modern power isn't just about what people might be seeing with their eyes, it's about what they are beginning to feel in their souls. The Thunderbird was never just an animal, it was the living embodiment of the storm, a regulator of the natural world. It was a force that brought the cleansing rain, that battled the monsters who upset the delicate balance of the earth. And in a world now facing an unprecedented ecological crisis, has there ever been a time when we needed that spirit more? The true thunder today is not the clap of a physical storm, but the roar of a planet in distress. The flash of lightning is the stark warning of climate change, of melting ice caps and raging wildfires. The Thunderbird's new monster is not a horned water serpent like Unveiling. It is the oil spill poisoning the ocean. It is the dam choking a sacred river. It is the relentless consumption that threatens to devour the very world that sustains us. In this context, the Thunderbird reemerges not as a creature to be hunted, but as a symbol to be honored. It is the ultimate environmental guardian, a mythic call to action, reminding us that nature's power is immense, beautiful, and terrifying, and that we are a part of it, not masters of it. Simultaneously, the Thunderbird has reemerged through a powerful cultural revitalization. For generations, its stories were suppressed, its ceremonies outlawed, its totem poles burned. But a story that powerful can never truly be destroyed. Today, Indigenous artists, storytellers, activists, and elders are ensuring its flight is seen and its voice is heard once more. Its form is carved into new totem poles, raised in defiance and celebration from the Pacific Northwest to the Great Plains. Its image is painted on murals in bustling cities, a potent symbol of Indigenous sovereignty and resilience. Its stories are being told to a new generation, not as quaint folklore, but as living history, as philosophy, as a guide for navigating the modern world. The reemergence of the Thunderbird is intrinsically linked to the reemergence of the cultures that have stewarded its story for millennia. It is a symbol that their spirit, like the great bird itself, could not be colonized, could not be extinguished, and is now soaring back into the light. But the most intimate, and perhaps the most important reemergence of the Thunderbird is not in the sky, or in the environment, or even in the culture. It is within us. The final evolution of the myth is the realization that the Thunderbird is not just an external deity or a physical beast, but an internal capacity. It is a metaphor for a power that lies dormant in the human spirit. Think of it, that sudden brilliant flash of inspiration that solves an impossible problem. That is the lightning from the Thunderbird's eyes. That surge of protective, righteous anger you feel when you see an injustice, when you witness the vulnerable being harmed, that is the shadow of its wing. The courage to speak truth to power, to stand up for your community, to fight for the future of the planet. That is the echo of its thunderous cry. The Thunderbird represents the potential within each of us to bring about profound change, to be a force of nature in our own lives, to cleanse what is stagnant, to challenge the monsters of our time, apathy, greed, and despair, and to nurture the world back into balance. So what is the legend of the Thunderbird in the 21st century? It is a memory, a story carried in the DNA of a continent, a whisper of a time when the world was animated by spirit. It is a metaphor, a powerful symbol for the untamable force of nature and the urgent need for balance. It is a warning, a rumbling in the distance that tells us our current path is unsustainable. And most of all, it is a promise that resilience is possible, that cultures can be reborn, that even in the most sterile and cynical of times, magic still exists. That power, true power, doesn't come from what we build, but from what we protect. The Thunderbird was born from the need to explain the unexplainable, to give a face to the awesome power of the sky. It evolved into a guardian, a warrior, a symbol of divine justice. It survived an apocalypse, becoming a symbol of resistance and enduring spirit. And now it has become something more, a mirror. It reflects our greatest fears for the planet and our deepest hopes for humanity. It is proof that a story told with enough heart can live for 10,000 years, adapting and changing, but never losing its essential power. The great bird is no longer just a Native American legend. It has become a myth for our time, a story for the whole world. The next time you hear the distant rumble of an approaching storm, stop for a moment. Close your eyes and listen. Feel the charge in the air, the shift in the wind. Ask yourself, is it just a collision of atmospheric pressures, a simple, explainable weather event? Or is it a reminder that the sky still has a guardian, that some stories are written not in ink but in lightning, and that the greatest legends never truly end. They just wait patiently for us to learn how to listen to them again.